My future in-laws' insults forced me to make a heartbreaking decision. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. Veronica adjusted her pearls and said, "Your kind marries up," quietly. I was holding the unsigned prenup in my left hand and my breath in my right. My name is Casey, and I am a nurse who charts in plain language and believes people deserve the same. I grew up fixing things that hurt without making them feel small. Veronica Hale calls that naive. She says I should be grateful her son loves somebody like me. Tonight, her voice sliced the tasting room while the caterer waited for my reply. I set the papers down and focused on my pulse, something I could trust. Jamie, my fiancé, tried a gentle laugh that sounded like an apology. "Mom's blunt," he whispered. We were 3 weeks out. My parents had already put deposits on the DJ and the bus for relatives who don't drive at night. "This is just to protect the family brand," Veronica said, gesturing at clauses that treated my future like a loose receipt. The document demanded I sign away any claim to marital growth and accept penalties for hypothetical embarrassments, defined as anything that could tarnish their reputation. I asked who decides what tarnish means. Veronica smiled like a judge with a favorite. "We do," she said. "It's in the addendum." Jamie stared at his shoes. I stared at the word addendum and imagined the stain it was meant to catch. I care for people on their worst days. I can spot a hemorrhage before a monitor screams. I know when pressure builds behind a smile. The rehearsal dinner was in 48 hours, a room full of their friends waiting to watch me fold or prove I belonged. If I sign, I lose myself. If I refuse, I risk losing Jamie. I told Veronica I needed time, and her answer was a chirp. "Of course, darling, we'll announce your decision at rehearsal." The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. She planned my signature like a toast, and I planned something else. The first time I met Veronica, she measured me like a dress form. Jamie and I had been dating 6 months, and she invited us to a brunch that felt like a board meeting pressed into a dining room. "Nurse," she said, landing on the word as if it were a rung below something acceptable. "Practical." I said yes, I am practical, in ways that keep people breathing. She laughed and asked whether I ever felt tempted to marry up out of tree-off. Jamie said she was joking. She always jokes like that, especially when she drinks. But the months layered on, and the joke sharpened. She called my father salt of the earth, in the tone you use for cast iron you won't put on your stove. She offered to cover our venue if we streamlined the guest list, which meant removing my cousins and adding her sponsors. When my mother bought her dress, Veronica told the table she loved how bravely simple it was, then patted her hand like a dog that had learned sit. Last week, the fresh wound. My aunt's photo appeared on social media from our shower, and Veronica commented, "Such heart in Casey's family, what they lack in polish." I asked Jamie to address it, and he promised to talk. The next day, the comment vanished, replaced by an effusive note about authentic charm. Jamie said, "See? She fixed it." I wondered if he noticed she had not apologized, only edited. Love made me believe I could navigate a woman whose power runs on applause. I kept choosing the small piece of letting things slide. It didn't feel like surrender then. It felt like being the bigger person. But I learned in the hospital that infection loves small places we ignore, and sometimes the wound you ignore becomes the one that costs you movement later. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. At rehearsal, Veronica would test my movement, and I might stop walking. The first red flag wore a smiley face. Veronica accidentally sent a spreadsheet to our shared wedding email with a tab labeled donors. The rows listed names, table assignments, and the phrase brand-sensitive placement. I asked the planner, and she apologized, then said those were courtesy notes for Mrs. Hale's philanthropic circle. A day later, our favorite photographer suddenly booked up, only to resurface on Veronica's gala page as a sponsor. Jamie said we were still getting a discount. Wasn't that good? Discounts that come with chains are just sales on futures. A florist voicemail mentioned a new directive from Hale Foundation to swap our modest bouquets for an elevated arrangement, with logos discreetly woven into the ribbon. I laughed because if I did not laugh, I would growl. It's exposure for your side too, Veronica said. Your mother's church could use the visibility. My mother prefers confidentiality to cameras. She knows dignity has no sponsor. I rationalized. Free upgrades mean less strain on my parents. But every gift required agreement to something that shrank me. A toast I had not approved, a seat I had not assigned, a story I had not lived. Then a vendor forwarded an email thread by mistake. Veronica had written, "We need to manage Casey's expectations. She confuses boundaries with disrespect." That sentence sat in my inbox like an X-ray with an unexpected shadow. I started to doubt my own read. Was I too sensitive, defending pride at the cost of partnership? In the ER, pride makes you ignore pain until your appendix bursts. At home, pride keeps you upright when someone else keeps trying to press your head down. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. I decided to stop rationalizing when the next strange invoice arrived. Escalation came dressed for cocktails. Veronica invited us to the club and surrounded herself with the kind of friends who laugh before the punchline. Casey works nights, she announced, which is noble, though it leaves little time for refinement. One woman asked if I wore scrubs to bed or only to family events. I said, just to crime scenes, and they blinked as if humor required a membership card. When the server poured champagne, Veronica lifted her glass and said, "To upgrades, eyes on my ring." That night, an envelope waited at our apartment, couriered and heavy. Inside, the prenup draft. I read every page. If I were terminated, if I left, if a rumor started, if a photo circulated, so many ifs hung like chandeliers built to fall. The penalties were stacked like luggage. A clause allowed her family to veto any media appearance I made, including community health outreach. Another required me to attend etiquette coaching if I underperformed in public relations. I texted Jamie, who was still at the club, to ask whether he had read it. He replied with a heart and, "We can tweak." Veronica's friends never tweak. They etch and notarize, then frame the etching. I printed the draft and highlighted the parts that turned marriage into a non-compete. At 11:40 p.m., a whisper at the door, a neighbor handing me a business card from a process server who had knocked while I was in the shower. He'd left a note about a temporary restraining request Veronica's team planned to file if I defamed her online. I had never posted about her, but the card looked official enough to make my stomach tilt. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. Someone expected me to stay silent, and I realized I would not. My mother cried in the quiet way she learned from years of budgeting both money and feeling. "We can cancel the bus," she said, hands flat on her kitchen table like paper boats in heavy rain. My father, a machinist with stubborn thumbs, wanted to pay for nothing Veronica touched. Jamie sat between them, a human apology letter. "Please," he said. "She's protective. It'll settle after the wedding." I wanted to believe him, but the house of after is built with never. Aunt Rosa arrived with empanadas and a folder. "You need to write down what you will and won't accept," she said. "Boundaries aren't insults. They're doors that keep good air inside." We made a list. No public mockery, no brand placements on our vows, no unilateral financial decisions. I texted Jamie the list and asked him to send it to his mother as a starting point. Veronica replied with a thumbs up and a calendar invite titled polishing session. The note said attire, business casual. I stared at my phone until the screen dimmed. Exile doesn't always mean you're kicked out. Sometimes it means you're admitted as a guest to your own life. Jamie kissed my forehead. 2 days, Case, he whispered. "Let's get through rehearsal." I nodded because I loved him, and because loving someone doesn't mean loving their storm. I packed a bag just in case, and Aunt Rosa said, "Mi casa." I heard safety in her kitchen fan, steady as a promise. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. The wall clock ticked with exacting judgment, indifferent to human pride. A florist's delivery cart squeaked, petals trembling like witnesses on the stand. I would bring the list to rehearsal, and something else for myself. Suspicion is a steady drip that finds the softest wall. It started with an email alias, Veronica. Hail. Foundation at Consulting Mail. Forwarding messages from vendors to a different address than the one on her charity website. The signature block looked polished, but the domain felt like a mask bought in a rush. A florist invoice included a routing number that didn't match the nonprofit's filings listed in a public database I use at work when patients need assistance. Then a charge on our joint wedding card appeared from a boutique I had never visited. The memo line read, "Appearance Coaching," and the receipt attachment used my full legal name. I called the boutique. They said Mrs. Hale had requested a package for her future daughter-in-law. Billed to our account. Non-refundable. The woman on the phone whispered, "She does this sometimes." I decided to track the money. I made a spreadsheet, the kind that keeps people alive in the ICU. Dates, amounts, who authorized, which account. For payments flowed into a shell named HFI Events, then out to vendors as donations. I called the number registered to HFI, and a man answered with a greeting for a luxury car service. "We do strategic logistics," he added, as if that explained philanthropy that parks money like limos. I chose to investigate quietly, not to entrap, but to keep receipts that might save us later. Secrets often demand darkness. Evidence likes fluorescent light. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. The wall clock ticked with exacting judgment, indifferent to human pride. A florist's delivery cart squeaked, petals trembling like witnesses on the stand. The next breadcrumb came from a planner's text I was never meant to see. The planner, Aaron, texted me by mistake at 7:12 a.m. confirming burn card cleared for ribbon order. Use foundation sender. I called her, heart loud. "Burn card." She paused, then exhaled. "I'm not supposed to say this," she whispered, "but there's a separate payment method for things Mrs. Hale wants off the books." Her voice turned brittle. "I'm not the only planner who's walked." I asked if we could meet. At a coffee shop near the hospital, Aaron slid a small folder across the table. Inside were copies of vendor notes and screenshots of emails where Veronica instructed staff to route courtesy upgrades through foundation channels. The timestamps didn't match the times Veronica claimed to be at fittings with me. She couldn't be in two places, and yet in the stories she told, she managed it constantly. I visited the bank listed on one invoice. The teller couldn't discuss accounts. Obviously, I didn't ask her to. But public records are public. I checked the state registry for nonprofits. Hill Foundation had filed late last year and amended twice. One amendment added events education, a category broad enough to hide a marching band. Another filing showed a board member resigning 2 weeks ago. At the courthouse, I searched case dockets by habit and curiosity. Nothing on Veronica, but a vendor had sued HFI Events for non-payment 5 months ago, settled in confidence. Secrets leave smudges even after you polish the mirror. I was starting to see fingerprints everywhere. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. The wall clock ticked with exacting judgment, indifferent to human pride. What I found next made the mirror look like a two-way window. The mini twist didn't reveal why, it revealed what. A ledger entry labeled Quiet Fund, J, appeared across several months of the Hale Foundation's internal memos Aaron had saved before quitting. Next to it, cash withdrawals that matched dates of Veronica's rumored outreach luncheons. The amounts weren't enormous individually, 2,000 here, 5,000 there, but the pattern mattered. Money in, money out, nobody talking about line items beyond brand hygiene. Then a file named Policy Agreements. PDF listed discretionary stipends for sensitive partners impacted by publicity. Partners, not vendors. The language was careful the way lies wear good shoes. One paragraph described non-disclosure agreements that would activate if a household member's private behavior risked the family brand. My name appeared on a draft list of covered associates. Without my knowledge, as if simply dating Jamie made me an asset to be insured or silenced. I didn't have motive yet. Ego, addiction, control. But I had scope. The stakes were no longer a tacky ribbon at the ceremony. If I signed the prenup, I could be bound to clauses that dovetailed with a hush money apparatus. If I refused, I might expose Jamie to a mother who prefers to solve problems with confidentiality checks. Aunt Rosa listened without interrupting, then said, "Me amor, choose the hard that protects your future, not the easy that sells it." The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. The wall clock ticked with exacting judgment, indifferent to human pride. A florist's delivery cart squeaked, petals trembling like witnesses on the stand. To choose, I needed proof sharp enough to cut through pearls. The plan had to be clean. I made a timeline from the first brunch to the courier's envelope. I recorded a call with the boutique where the appearance coaching package had been bought, confirming the purchaser and the charge to our card. I saved screenshots of foundation filings, Aaron's emails, and the ledger references to the quiet fund. I drafted questions in plain English, the way I would for a patient. What is this? Who benefits? Who pays if it goes wrong? I considered confronting Jamie first, but I remembered how easily Veronica rewrites a moment after it happens. I needed a witness. Attorney Patel was recommended by a social worker who helps our patients through guardianship messes. He didn't do weddings, he did clarity. Bring documents, he said. No speeches. Patel read silently for 10 minutes, then underlined items the way you might circle smoke detectors in a rental. This isn't a prenup, he finally said. It's a behavior contract disguised as asset protection. He tapped the hush fund language. If these intersect, you become both a risk and a resource. Don't sign anything until you see the books. We arranged a time to meet at his office after the rehearsal, when Jamie could attend and, if willing, invite Veronica. Truth likes daylight, Patel said. Bring an umbrella anyway. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. The wall clock ticked with exacting judgment, indifferent to human pride. A florist's delivery cart squeaked, petals trembling like witnesses on the stand. In the hallway, phones buzzed with updates none of us wanted to read. Veronica smelled rain before noon and brought a storm no umbrella stops. At the tasting, Veronica was sugar and knives. She pressed a velvet box into my hands, diamond studs, a little polish. Then came the whisper, signed by tonight, and the coaching package goes away. Jamie squeezed my knee under the table, pleading without words. I heard the word tonight echo like a code. Pressure cooks food, and people, both can explode if sealed wrong. I excused myself and called Aunt Rosa from the hallway. If you don't hear from me by 11, I'm at your place, I said. She said, the door's unlocked, and the couch is already judging anyone who disrespects you. I laughed, which loosened the knot just enough to breathe. Back inside, Veronica shifted to threats dipped in etiquette. My friends will be at rehearsal, she said. They're sponsors for the hospital wing. Imagine the optics if you embarrass us. Optics is how people say sight when they mean permission. I pictured patients whose names end up on donor lists they never agreed to share, and my spine decided not to bend. Aunt Rosa texted me a photo of a note she taped to her fridge. Boundaries are kindness to your future self. I tucked it under my tongue like a lozenge. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. The wall clock ticked with exacting judgment, indifferent to human pride. A florist's delivery cart squeaked, petals trembling like witnesses on the stand. In the hallway, phones buzzed with updates none of us wanted to read. Even the carpet felt staged, cushioning steps that refused to back down. Across the room, framed photos smiled with the brittle confidence of trophies. Veronica leaned in then, and said something that changed everything instantly. "The prenup won't protect Jamie from you," Veronica murmured, perfume thick as theater. "It will protect our name when you eventually disappoint him." It was so casual, I almost admired the engineering. I said nothing. Silence is a tray that makes people pour more of themselves. She added, "You'll sign at Patel's tomorrow. I've already confirmed with his assistant." I hadn't told her about Patel. Jamie blinked. "Mom?" he asked, voice small. Veronica smiled. "I make calls, darling. Power likes to step on the surprise it didn't design." I responded with my own. "Great," I said. "You should come." She agreed before she realized the door I had opened. Witnesses distort spin. That night, I moved my dress to Aunt Rosa's closet. I put my ring in a dish and slept with my phone on airplane mode. Morning began with the hospital's coffee and a patient who greeted me like family. It reminded me who I am outside of someone else's script. At noon, I texted Jamie that I loved him and that we were going to hear facts together. He replied with a heart and 3 dots that disappeared, then returned, then disappeared again. Dots can feel like promises failing in real time. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. The wall clock ticked with exacting judgment, indifferent to human pride. A florist's delivery cart squeaked, petals trembling like witnesses on the stand. In the hallway, phones buzzed with updates none of us wanted to read. Even the carpet felt staged, cushioning steps that refused to back down. Across the room, framed photos smiled with the brittle confidence of trophies. Patel's conference room door clicked, and Veronica arrived with a folder. Patel's office smelled like paper and peppermint tea. He began with ground rules. One person speaks at a time. We stick to documents. Veronica nodded as if she chaired the committee. I placed the ledger screenshots, invoices, and email headers on the table. Patel projected the filings from the state registry. "These are public," he said gently. "We'll start there." Veronica flipped open her folder, revealing glossy prints of my social media from college and 2 emails I had written to vendors asking for clarity. "This is harassment," she declared. Patel's eyebrow rose half a centimeter. "Transparency," he corrected. Then he asked, "Mrs. Hale, what is the quiet fund?" The pause that followed was small and loud. Veronica said the fund supported sensitive transitions. Patel asked which transitions required confidentiality agreements for romantic partners. She pivoted to philanthropy. He asked for board minutes. She offered reputation. He offered regulations. The mask didn't fall. It slid, the way a portrait tilts when the nail loosens. Jamie's hands were clasped so hard his knuckles grayed. I watched him see it. Not the money. He had seen money all his life, but the control dressed as protection. Veronica finally said, "We do what's necessary to protect our family from opportunists." Patel clicked to the clause in the prenup that would penalize me for speaking recklessly about internal matters. "Define reckless," he said. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. The wall clock ticked with exacting judgment, indifferent to human pride. A florist's delivery cart squeaked, petals trembling like witnesses on the stand. Veronica's next sentence made Jamie flinch as if struck across the face. "Reckless is when a nurse thinks she belongs at our table," Veronica said. The word nurse landed like a gavel. Jamie exhaled as if a room had vanished. Patel went very still. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "we're done negotiating courtesy." He summarized the conflicts between the foundation payments and the behavior clauses. He suggested Jamie request independent counsel and temporarily pause all wedding expenditures until the books were reviewed. The fallout began before we stood up. A vendor emailed to say her sponsorship would be reevaluated. The venue asked for confirmation that no political fundraising would occur at our reception, which told me rumors were already walking. My phone lit with a block number threatening a breach of goodwill if I shared proprietary details. Patel forwarded everything to a colleague and told me to document. Jamie cried in the hallway. "I wanted you both," he said. I thought I could translate. I held his hand and told him love does not require fluency in disrespect. He nodded, then flinched when his mother called his name from down the hall. He didn't go. Small miracles count. I lost deposits. I lost a version of my future that had lace on the edges. I kept my name and the ability to look at myself in reflective surfaces without rehearsing permission first. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. The wall clock ticked with exacting judgment, indifferent to human pride. A florist's delivery cart squeaked, petals trembling like witnesses on the stand. In the hallway, phones buzzed with updates none of us wanted to read. Then Jamie said he had one decision he needed to make alone. Healing did not look like triumph. It looked like calendars and therapy copays, like Aunt Rosa leaving containers on my porch with notes that said, "Eat anyway." Jamie and I made a boundary agreement in writing. Couples counseling with therapist Kim, no Veronica in our home, no financial gifts without mutual consent. If the hush fund review uncovered illegality, we would cooperate with authorities separately. He moved into an apartment near the hospital to practice deciding without applause. I returned the diamond studs with a receipt that said declined with gratitude for lessons. I kept my shift routine, vitals, meds, translation for a family who couldn't find their way through insurance. My patients reminded me that dignity is a daily practice, not a headline. Veronica tried to send flowers. I asked the florist to donate them to the hospice wing instead. We didn't announce anything at the rehearsal because there was no rehearsal. There was a quiet evening where I learned the exact weight of my own relief and the strange loneliness that accompanies breathing after you've held air too long. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. The wall clock ticked with exacting judgment, indifferent to human pride. A florist's delivery cart squeaked, petals trembling like witnesses on the stand. In the hallway, phones buzzed with updates none of us wanted to read. Even the carpet felt staged, cushioning steps that refused to back down. Across the room, framed photos smiled with the brittle confidence of trophies. The venue's air conditioning whispered, a practiced hush for uncomfortable truths. Relief turned into resolve the day Jamie rang my doorbell at dusk. Jamie stood on the porch with a small suitcase and a letter. His hands shook. "I told her I'm choosing a family that doesn't keep secrets," he said. The letter documented his request for an audit of the foundation and his resignation from any boards until the review concluded. "I'm late to myself," he added, voice raw. We didn't plan a wedding that night. We ate Aunt Rosa's soup on the couch and listened to the humidifier hum like a distant ocean. In time, we might marry. In time, we might not. Love is not a prize you win for outlasting cruelty. It's two people deciding the same whether is worth crossing together. We started with small crossings, a Saturday morning with no demands, a walk where his phone stayed silent, a practice of saying, "I hear you," before problem solving. For the viewers who are older than me and wiser, I learned that boundaries are doors you build before the fire, not after. If someone calls your dignity an embarrassment, they're telling you their terms. Believe them, then choose yours. Keep receipts. Speak plainly. Be willing to walk, even if your dress is already pinned. The chandelier hummed while the planner shuffled papers, a small, nervous metronome. Outside, traffic stitched a low drone that made every pause feel heavier. I noticed the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold ambition. Somewhere, cutlery chimed against porcelain like distant bells counting our decisions. A server passed by with sparkling water, and bubbles climbed like doubt. The wall clock ticked with exacting judgment, indifferent to human pride. A florist's delivery cart squeaked, petals trembling like witnesses on the stand. In the hallway, phones buzzed with updates none of us wanted to read. Even the carpet felt staged, cushioning steps that refused to back down. Across the room, framed photos smiled with the brittle confidence of trophies. The venue's air conditioning whispered, a practiced hush for uncomfortable truths. I chose my future voice over borrowed pearls, and I kept walking.